Hello and good morning, everybody.
Hi, it's James Swanson.
James, how are you doing today?
Great, how are you?
Absolutely fantastic. I've been excited to talk with you, and the reason why is because I love it when people discover something that the rest of us don't know about, and yet it happened.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's really one of the least known stories in all of early America.
Wow. What led you to this journey?
Well, I spent some time in Deerfield during college. Historic Deerfield had a summer fellowship program for college students where we spent the summer studying decorative arts, history, architecture, Native American culture. And I spent the time living in Deerfield in a pre-Revolutionary War house, and I just became obsessed with the story.
Wow. This involves a surprise attack, and the march itself was just, I mean, to me, it's haunting that something like this would even take place.
Oh, it is. It is. I mean, they killed 50 people. They took 112 captive on a forced march to Canada, slaughtering people along the way with tomahawks and war clubs. It's a great story of battle and blood and survival in early New England. It's just incredible.
One of the things that you point out in the book is that weakness was never accepted. And I look at today's society going, whoa, how many of us could survive something like this?
No, it's true. Weakness was not accepted by the natives who captured the colonists. Weakness was not accepted by the Puritan theologians who dominated New England, nor was weakness accepted by the Jesuit priests into whose hands the captives fell. It was not a time for mercy. Not at all. You know, during the Salem witchcraft trials just preceded the Deerfield Massacre, and 19 people were executed because the people thought they were witches.
Wow. How did word get around? These days, we have social media where we instantly know what's going on. How did the rest of the nation, even react to this?
Well, it was not widely known because, remember, Deerfield, Massachusetts was a very remote colonial outpost, and it was only 300 people. Wow. Boston was 90 miles away. And so word of mouth reached nearby towns, and they spread the word to Boston and other New England towns. And it spread slowly, mostly by foot, by word of mouth, and spreading the word that way. There was not even a newspaper in Deerfield, and there was no telegraph. There was no rapid communication. So it spread slowly through New England, and it created terror throughout the whole region of the country. Because where were the Indians and Canadians going to strike next? Which town would fall? Which people would be kidnapped from their fields, and you never see them again? So there was a climate of fear and terror throughout early New England during this period. It was 75 years before the American Revolution. Washington, John Adams, Ben Franklin, they haven't even been born yet.
Yeah.
They themselves would not have recognized the Deerfield of 1704. It was a frightening, remote, and dark and dangerous place.
I think what really draws me to this story is the fact that I've always thought of Canada and nations, Native American nations, working together, and it was with Chief Joseph. I didn't even know that this was even taking place.
Yes, in fact, several tribes, Abnakis, Mohawks, Hurons, and others participated in the attack. And the French had their allies in Canada. And these tribes had different agendas. The French were not the masters of the tribes. The tribes were their equal partners. And some of the tribes wanted to kill people. Some of them wanted to take captives and ransom them for money. And some of the tribes wanted to capture people and incorporate into the tribes to replace fallen people in battle or death. So they wanted to turn them into Indians. So there were multiple motives of all these tribes. And it's a very fascinating part of the story.
Is it in any way, and I know this was way down the road, the connection with the French, with the Native Americans, did that lead to somewhere along the line the French and Indian War?
Yes, ultimately. The French and Indian War was the ultimate example. Long before the French and Indian War in the 1750s and early 1760s, France and England were battling over control of the North American continent. France and England were enemies in Europe and across the seas in America. And it led to these bloody conflicts for over decades of New England history. There was not peace on the New England frontier until 50 or 60 years later after the Deerfield Massacre. It was a constant time of war and danger, captivities, ambushes, sneak attacks. Wow. New England was a dangerous place for decades.
Because I'm so close to Charleston, South Carolina, I love just walking into that area because that area was also under attack as well. But I love just going and listening. Do you find yourself doing that with Deerfield just to see if the spirits of that world are still very active?
Well, I'll tell you what I did just a few days ago. I was in Deerfield, Massachusetts, and I gave a big talk in town at the Deerfield Academy. We had 700 people there, which is remarkable in itself to get 700 people to show up
right
in the middle of winter in New England for a lecture about Indian captivity and warfare. But I have a custom. Whenever I go to Deerfield, and I go there many times, I walk the route that the Indians and French took through town to the attack. I walk down to the river, and the riverbank has changed in shape many times because of floods and winter storms and all the rest. But so I look for the approximate place where the colonists would have crossed the river, not knowing when or ever they would return. And then a few days ago, I walked to the Deerfield Cemetery, and I visited the graves of John and Eunice Williams, and they lie next to each other. She was slain the day after the march. She fell into the river, got soaked wet, was freezing, and an Indian killed her with one blow of his tomahawk. And her gravestone says, "Felled by ye rage of ye barbarous enemy." And then her husband, who lived 25 years past the attack and remained the minister in Deerfield after his freedom, his tombstone is more quiet, and it says, "Here lies the body of Reverend John Williams, faithful pastor of this place." And so I ended the night by going to the cemetery and laying my hands on both their tombstones.
Oh, man.
My wife said, "Don't touch those stones; you'll fall through them," like in the TV series Outlander. You'll be transported to the night of the massacre. But I feel the resonance of it in time. And the greatest relic in New England history is in the Pocumtuck Valley Memorial Association Museum in Deerfield. It's the so-called Old Indian Door, and that's a door with dozens of tomahawk and axe cuts in the door. As the Indians tried to cut through and break down the door, they cut a hole through it, thrust a musket barrel through and fired a wild shot and killed the woman randomly. But that door was never breached during the attack. And it still speaks with those tomahawk cuts and axe cuts in the door and the hole cut through. It's studded with hundreds of iron nails to repel the sharp blades of tomahawks. Yeah. So I can just imagine the sparks of the metal striking the iron that created that night. It must have been actually a completely terrifying experience.
With the way that you just put so much passion into that story, do you feel like that you're the archaeologist, the historian, or do you feel like that you've been reincarnated into this moment and you're sharing that story? Because you know that thing in detail.
Well, I feel like anyways, I feel like I was there. Just like my book, my first book was really Manhunt, the 12-Day Chase for Lincoln's Killer, about the assassination of Lincoln and the hunt for John Wilkes Booth. And I know that story so well. I almost feel like I've lived it. I've been to Ford's Theater hundreds of times. I've gone to the Peterson House hundreds of times because I live in Washington, D.C., and been to the Peterson House where Lincoln died. And I've held in my hands a fragment of the actress Laura Keene's dress, who was in the play that night. And she ran up to the box and she cradled Lincoln's head in her lap. And this piece of fabric is stained with his blood and brain matter.
Oh, my God.
I've held in my hand a lock of Lincoln's hair cut by Secretary of War Stanton the morning that Lincoln died. These are in my own personal collection. So they're talismans that evoke to me the feeling of what it must have been like. And I feel the same with Deerfield. Just a few days ago, I went to that old Indian door and visited it at the museum in Deerfield. And I laid my hands on the door. And I could almost feel the reverberations of the tomahawk strikes and the attempts to break it down. So for me, history is very real. I need the objects and the places and the things that were there that transport me back in time. And when I see these things and touch these things, I really feel like I'm there.
Wow. Where can people go to find out more about you, James?
Oh, they can find me on Twitter at James L. Swanson, and they can go to Amazon or my publisher Scribner's website that has more about the book.
Wow, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
Oh, I would love to. And let me say this. Maybe I can come back at some point because we've just done a 7-part Apple TV series on the Manhunt story starring Tobias Menzies from Outlander.
Oh, well, you've got to come back. You talk to your PR person. Let's make this thing happen.
I'd love to. I'd love to.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you so much.